Hello. So today I'd like to talk about an important topic, and it's something I call biblical common sense or Christian common sense. And to me, this seems like something that would be logical. I feel like if you have wisdom, you will understand what I'm talking about. So, but unfortunately, I don't see this quite as often as I would like. The problem is people tend to gravitate towards extremes. You can see this quite clearly in our politics in America, as you have this extreme Democrat Party, and then you have like the Republican Party, and some of them are reasonable, but some of them are like really extreme, and things become more polarized over time, and people take these very strong, very black and white opinions, and it's not always like that. So in Christianity, you also kind of have that in a bit. So you have like liberal mainstream churches on one end. That's one end of the spectrum, and then the other end of the spectrum, you have these like super rigid conservative churches where everything's a sin. And so you have these two extremes, and both positions are wrong. So you need to have balance in these positions. You need to have common sense. And so, for example, someone on the mainstream liberal end, this is, I mean, they don't call anything a sin. Everything's acceptable, and this is wickedness. This is wickedness before God. So people on that end, they might be very nice, and it's very easy to invite people to church because they're so nice to everybody. But at the end of the day, you can't preach heresy. You have to preach truth. You have to preach the Bible, and you need to call sin when it's a sin. You can't just bring sin into the church and not deal with it. There's a difference between you need to love the people. Obviously, you need to love them, but you cannot accept their sin. You can't say, "Oh, this is not a sin." It's still a sin. When that's how Jesus did things. Jesus would call people out in love. When he told the women, what did he tell one of the women? He said, he forgave her sins, and he said, "Go and sin no more." He didn't just say go. He said, "Go and sin no more." And that's what it means to actually repent. And it also means you need to, for other people, you need to call out when something's a sin. So people on the liberal mainstream end, they need to toughen up, and they need to preach truth. So that's what they need to learn. On the other end of the spectrum, you have these like super conservative people, and well, and the problem there is that they're doctrinally correct, or more likely to be doctrinally correct, and they know the Bible better. People on the conservative end definitely know the Bible better, and they obviously care more about God, and a lot of times I would say they have a better relationship with God most of the time than the liberals. However, sometimes there is a lack of love. There's too much legalism. People get stuck on rules. And basically, people on the conservative end, sometimes they need to kind of lighten up a bit and soften up. And and the thing is, you have a good balance when you are stricter with yourself than you are with other people. So, you can be disciplined. You could have be very zealous, read the Bible, pray, be very committed to the Lord. But you can't necessarily always hold other people to the same standards that you can that you hold yourself to, because you don't know their background. You need to show some love and some kindness and some compassion. This is a more of an issue with the conservatives. You need to have some common sense and maybe lighten up. So because otherwise you end up pushing people away. That's the problem, is they push people away, and because they act in a non-biblical manner, not showing love. So it's a balance, and you need to have wisdom. This is very important. You need to show love, but you also need to call out sin when it's sin, and that is wisdom. Wisdom is not being extreme. It's not being in one of those two categories. Wisdom is adapting to the situation. And I mean, honestly, I would say the safer thing is just to be on the conservative end. That's the safer thing to do. and to be strict with yourself and discipline, have a strong commitment to the Lord, you will, and that is better. But you need to show compassion to other people and love, because if you go too far in being strict, then you will push people away, and you will not show love, and you will not be doing the Lord's will. You will not be doing God's will. So it is a balance, and I believe there's something called biblical common sense. You need to pick your battles. That's what I'm saying. You want to pick your battles. If you're arguing with someone, that's the important thing. If you're arguing with someone, is it worth it? Is this actually important, what you are arguing about with someone? Is this an actual important doctrine? Or is this a minor thing? Most of the time, it ends up being a minor thing. If it's a serious doctrine, very important doctrine to the Bible, then yes. But in my experience, I have seen some people get really caught up on minor doctrines that are not actually that important and are subject to opinion. So that's what I want to say is you want to have love, you want to have wisdom, but also discipline, and you need to have some backbone. You need to have some Christian backbone, but also some wisdom with it. So that's what I want to say. That's what I want to challenge everyone to do, is to have that wisdom, because that's when you will make the correct decision. So it's to adapt to the situation, and you need to talk to some people differently. Like with someone, you could be a little more strict. With others, you need to show maybe a little more love and compassion. That is wisdom. If you read the book of Proverbs, that is the kind of lesson you should be getting out of the book of Proverbs. So anyway, see you next time.